Hello everyone, welcome back. We are continuing with our Christmas romance book reviews, and we are starting off this week with Spirit of the Season by Fern Michaels. Let's see if I can get one. There we go. So check out that cover art. It's so beautiful. I love it. It's really the only thing I loved about this book, but we'll get into that. So trigger warnings for the story include an elderly woman who passes away from a heart attack. It is actually from her perspective, so it describes the pain going down her arm, not being able to move, and the various sensations that go along with it. So if you've had a heart attack in the past and it was very traumatic, or if you have a loved one who has passed away from a heart attack, that's something you might want to consider before reading this story. If you think you can get past that first chapter, like just skip that first chapter and go on with the rest of the story, that's cool. But if not, then it's something to definitely take into consideration. So this is the story of Joy Preston, who has received the sad notification that her grandmother has passed. Again, that was the elderly woman who passed in the first chapter. So she leaves Colorado, where she lives and works from, to go back to North Carolina, which is where she was raised and where her mother is, to be there for her mother for the funeral. At this time, she learns that in order for the bed and breakfast that her grandmother ran and has been in their family for generations, in order for this bed and breakfast to remain in the family, Joy has to come home to North Carolina and run the business for 6 months. Now, this is a huge problem because Joy is a very successful businesswoman in her own right. Back in Colorado, she runs a nail polish company. And so she basically has to rearrange her work life and her business to be in North Carolina for the next 6 months to run the family business, which she does do. And she, during this time in North Carolina, she kind of starts a relationship with Will Drake, who is the attorney that her grandmother had. And eventually she does decide to move back to North Carolina permanently, running the business remotely from there. There was so much that could have been done with this story. There were so many side stories. It could have been so interesting. So she's running this bed and breakfast at holiday time, right? There's a gingerbread contest between the different bed and breakfasts in town. Apparently the owners of all these bed and breakfasts are widowed women, and they've gotten pretty vicious with each other over this competition. They're very competitive, and they will resort to spreading rumors about each other, spying on each other, all sorts of like crazy things for a gingerbread making competition. There's also a bed and breakfast decorating competition between the same bed and breakfasts. And apparently her grandmother's bed and breakfast has won every year. There's this side story that apparently the bed and breakfast is known to be haunted, but in a very specific way. If you have a loved one who has passed away and you are staying in this bed and breakfast, there's the possibility that you might have an interaction with your deceased loved one. There's this side arc where Joy becomes hands-on with trying to be helpful to a couple that runs a women's shelter for abused women. There's a side story between her and Will. There's this the development between her and her mother, because she realizes she wants to be a more active role in her mother's life, and her mother is a widow as well, so really they're the only two women, the only two people from their family left at this time. So there's a lot of things that could have made this story so much better, but none of it is fleshed out. None of it. The gingerbread competition, they talk about how vicious these other women get, and yet there's no conflict that arises from it. The ghost aspect of the story, which I will admit was a little unexpected given the fact that it's a holiday romance. You have two elderly guests who are there specifically hoping to have an interaction with their deceased spouse. and they talk about their interactions with their spouse or lack thereof. And then at one point, Joy thinks that she is seeing her grandmother, and it's for like a split second. And that's it. That's really all you get from this haunted bed and breakfast side story. Again, the decorating competition, same thing as the gingerbread competition. In the story with her and Will, we'll get to that. Joy has this unspecified blood sugar issue. There's a scene where she basically snaps at her mother and one of the other staff members, and I thought it was going to go down the road of she snapping. Her grandmother passed away. She has to run this bed and breakfast. She has to run her business remotely. I mean, that's a lot of stress. I could see it being like grief and stress just piling up, and she just kind of blows up. That would have been reasonable. It would have fit in well with the story. But no, out of nowhere, it's just like, oh yeah, I have a problem with my blood sugar, and if it gets too low, I basically turn into a raving she-bitch. But at no point is this blood sugar issue specified. You don't know if it's diabetes, you don't know if it's thyroid disorder, you don't know if it's hyperglycemia, hypoglycemia, you don't know any of that. It's just a blood sugar condition that she has. And aside from the occasional mention of, well, I don't want to blow up at anybody again, so I'm having a sandwich right now. Aside from that, nothing else comes from it. At one point, Will mentions that he gets this sadness around the holidays and he doesn't understand why. And then Joy just blurts out, well, I read this article and it sounds like this random thing and you need more vitamin D. And he's like, oh, okay, that's a good idea. And that's it. You don't get anything else from that. Will does find this lost dog that he takes in. And I think you get the most development out of any of the storylines from the dog, is because he goes and he puts up like the lost dog flyers. He takes the dog takes the dog to the vet to see if the dog has been chipped or not. And he mentions how much he's gotten to be attached to this dog and he would hate to see him go and all this stuff. That's the most development you get out of any of the storylines. And then there's the storyline with her and Will. And throughout the course of this entire book, they have maybe somewhere between 5 and 8 interactions. And by the end of the book, they're engaged. Now, don't get me wrong. I love a good insta-love romance. I know a lot of people don't like it. It's unrealistic. That's fine with me. I love fairy tales, so it goes right with me, right? But that's not what this is supposed to be. This is supposed to be a holiday romance kind of a thing, right? So it should be something that at least makes sense. And it doesn't. None of this makes sense. I mean, to be honest, there are points in this where I question if her mother is really her mother, because there doesn't seem to be any real familial chemistry between them. It's just boring. It is a boring book. And considering what the storyline is, what all the side stories are, there's no reason why it should be boring. And I feel really bad saying that because I've read books by this author before. And I know that I enjoy them a heck of a lot more than I enjoyed this one. None of the stories are fleshed out. None of the characters are fleshed out. And it's boring. There's no chemistry between anybody. And this book took me over a week to read. That very rarely happens. I think the last book that took me this long to read was Immortal Hexes and the books from the Elite Kings Club. And that's because of how involved those stories are. This is not a very involved story. It's just that boring. So, because it is the spirit of the holiday season, I'm going to be generous with my rating for this book, but I give this book a 1.7 stars. Or 1.7 out of 5 stars. I was going to give it a 1.5. But again, it's holidays. I'm being nice. I'm giving it a 1.7. To date, this is the most boring holiday romance I've ever come across. Does it mean it won't be dethroned? No. But so far, most boring one ever. So, I'm going to say something I almost never say about authors or books. Save your money, don't get it. Personal opinion. Don't let it dissuade you if you're genuinely interested, but if you're kind of on the ropes about it or you're not sure, save yourself the, how much? $10. Because I paid for this full price. I didn't get it at secondhand books. I didn't get on sale. I got full price. And I seriously want a refund. So, I'm sorry this wasn't a terribly happy review. I'm sorry it's kind of a downer to start off the week. I'm hoping that the next ones will be better. Actually, I know the next ones will be better because I've already read the next two. So, that being said, please come back for the next review. I promise it'll be better. You have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.